Hey guys, how are you? It's Fahad Siddiqi here, and welcome back to the Fahad Siddiqi podcast. Thank you guys for checking in so much. Again, if you're here, you're probably a subscriber. If you're finding us new, please click the subscribe, like button so you can get these updates every time that we come on. Because I don't want you to miss out on the amazing, amazing people that we're having on. For instance, today I've got a kindred spirit brother of mine, Omar Abdalla, out of Arizona, and you and I connected maybe last week, and I instantly we clicked because we operate in the same exact way, same exact mentality and mindset. And I said, brother, don't got to preach to me, we got to preach to the people, right?
Yeah.
So, today is going to be just all about how we, and I say we, me and you, we both operate, we do deals. We're both experienced, seasoned real estate investors and operators. And, we both align in wanting to better the Muslim community, at least here in the United States, in terms of making real estate investing easier, more accessible, and of course, in a halal Sharia-compliant way. So, Omar, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Fahad. Very happy to be here. Very happy to have come across you on social media, and you were so quick to want to connect, and I appreciate that because I wanted to connect with you. So we're really glad we're getting on and we're connecting, and looking forward to having this conversation.
Definitely, man. Yeah, I said it before. I'll say it again. I love connecting. So I think people maybe get surprised that I I'm not gonna lie and say that I do all of my social media engagement, but I would say 70% of the time, if you DM me, you're gonna get a DM back from me personally. And that's exactly what happened. You reached out to me, um, and I got back to you, and I was like, "What's your cell
Yeah.
phone number? Let's talk. Let's go. Let's do it." So yeah, let's start here. They know me. Omar, tell us about you. Where you grew up, where your family's from, what have you been doing professionally and before you got into real estate now?
And some of this I shared with you on offline, but a lot of it I didn't. So I'm Palestinian and Syrian. That's where my family comes from. I was born in Michigan. Grew up in Michigan, raised around a real estate family. My father's a civil engineer. He was always in real estate, kind of, that typical immigrant entrepreneur
Yeah.
spirit, very big on education, but also, he can work that job, but once he figures out he can do it by himself, he's going to leave that job and start his own, real estate development company. And so that's what I grew up around. In 2006, when the economy started to get kind of tough in Michigan, because my dad was in real estate, and it's heavily the automotive industry is pretty heavy out there. We moved to Arizona, and that's when my father, got into real estate here in Phoenix, Arizona. He started flipping houses in 2009, 2010, which was a really great time. And here I am, I'm like in high school at the time, and I'm trying to figure out my life. I grew up thinking I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps, be a civil engineer, and then, also go off and do my own real estate ventures. But the state of the economy kind of scared me. And so I went through this period, which I feel like a lot of us of Muslim or ethnic immigrant backgrounds go through, where I was like, okay, what's the alternative? Well, I can be a doctor, right? I mean, we're all told we need to be doctors. And so for a while, I was like, I'm looking into the pre-med route, and I really just had no interest in it at all. No interest in chemistry, biology, any of that. And so next best thing is to become a lawyer. Um,
Naturally.
Naturally, yeah, those are the only three careers really I'm familiar with at the time. And so, and I'm like, I'll go to law school, but I'm really only going to be interested in real estate law because my long-term vision is to be in real estate, whether it's real estate development or fix and flipping or whatever it might be. So I studied, and I did this for a very specific reason. I studied finance and real estate in college. That's what my bachelor's was. Knowing that I never was going to work in finance, I just
Yeah.
was so interested in how the financial markets worked, how finance worked in this country, even though it was, it's all based off of interests and all of that stuff. I just wanted to understand. And around that time, I also read Rich Dad Poor Dad, which you might be
Mm,
familiar with, Robert
absolutely.
Kiyosaki. And so I learned all about the power of real estate, but it was so heavily based on leverage,
Hmm.
interest. And I was like, there must be a way for me to be able to acquire these assets, be involved in real estate without having to get loans. And this is before I discovered like crowdfunding and joint ventures and whatnot. So I was like, I'll become a lawyer, high paying career, and I'll just, buy houses outright in cash. And so in law school, studied, in law school, I focused on the real estate classes mostly. And then I worked with my dad for a year in his business, and then I focused on law school. In law school, I got an internship with a law firm, and then I stayed with them for about 6 years practicing real estate law, more specifically in like the land use practice area, which is like zoning. Did a lot of rezonings, variance cases, dealt with land use issues all around Arizona. I worked on master planning of subdivisions, residential communities, self-storage, expansion projects. I did a huge 1,000-acre rezoning in the city of
Yeah.
Casa Grande for a
Wow.
copper mine, all kinds of stuff all over Arizona. I learned a lot, and then and realized that, even though I was making really good money, it's not that easy to just come up with enough money to be buying houses by yourself in cash.
Right.
And so I really started to explore the world of crowdfunding and raising capital from investors. And I'm still, learning about that. But in January of last year, I decided that's it. I'm leaving my job. I'm going all in. I'm joining the family business. And so I left back to working with my dad on his projects. And so we're doing a lot of fix and flips together. He's been doing them. He never stopped really since 2010. So we're doing those together, and then I'm also getting involved in some of our development projects. We have some land, a few parcels around Arizona. I'll be working mostly on the entitlement aspect, which is where my legal experience is from. But instead, this will be on the personal project side rather than working on
Definitely.
entitlements for clients. So that's where I am so far, and inshallah,
Mashallah, man. That's
trying
awesome.
to
That
keep
is
busy.
amazing. There's so much stuff that I want to touch upon and get into. I
Good.
want to go back to the beginning because I believe that everything starts with mindset and attitude. You mentioned that you, like me, are the son of immigrants. How do you think, uh, you know, growing up, were you aware or did you know that your parents are not from this country, that they are having to learn this system and work really, really hard just to, I feel like we took it for granted, right? As an
Yeah.
adult now, I look back and I'm like, oh wow, like I could never do that, right? Like, it's really hard. But there's something about our generation, our culture, where I think the good thing is that we inherited this hustle mindset, make the best use of the opportunities that we're being given here and really just paying it back to our parents, to our community. So yeah, your family being from Palestine and Jordan, right?
Syria.
Syria. What was that like growing up?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, we definitely did take it for granted, not knowing how much hard work had happened behind the scenes, for my parents to be able to give us the life that they gave us. So we're definitely very appreciative and grateful
Yeah.
for
Like your dad, when he was an engineer
that.
in Syria.
No, in Michigan, in Michigan.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
so
like, did he become an engineer in Michigan, or did he have to transfer over? Like, his education didn't transfer over, or something like that,
he
or
did, yeah, he studied engineering in Syria, and then he
okay,
came to the US and did his master's in civil engineering here in
gotcha,
Michigan. And then he worked as a civil engineer for a development company for like 7
gotcha,
years.
yeah,
And, eventually it was like, why work for the man? Why work
mm-hmm.
for this company as just a little engineer when I can go out and start my own development company?
Yeah,
That's what he did. But our parents, they keep all of that hard work to themselves. We don't know that he's out there grinding, trying to build this business to give us all a better life. And I mean, we he did involve us in some ways, in that he would take us, me and my siblings, to the construction sites.
yeah,
And so it was really interesting to see big pieces of land like former farms where they still have an old barn on them and
wow,
whatnot. And he would take us out there and kind of explain the vision, right? We're gonna demolish this. He wouldn't explain the entitlement part where he's getting approvals
sure.
from the city and whatnot, but eventually you'll see homes. And we actually there's a small he's built several subdivisions in Michigan, but there's one subdivision where there's an area that has streets named after all of us siblings.
Oh,
So
no way. Oh
yeah,
my
there's and my
goodness.
mom. Yeah, so there's an Omar Drive or like an Ekram Courts. There's so it's
Oh,
really
that's
interesting.
awesome.
Yeah. So we saw
Um,
that growing up, which was
so from
great.
what I'm hearing, was your dad pretty, he was inspiring you like to be entrepreneurial?
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
I think you got lucky that maybe he wasn't so traditional, trying to make you guys go down the traditional paths of careers and
Yeah.
jobs. He seemed to be more, hey, this is what we can do if we work for ourselves and we build it and all that stuff. Um, am I right in that?
Yeah, but what's interesting is he never said that explicitly.
Hmm.
So, school was always the priority. Having straight A's or having as many A's as you can, and then I have a vivid memory of my brother and I sitting down with my dad every Saturday or Sunday at home and doing multiplication and division with him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so, education was key, was very, very important. And then you know, as we got older, they wanted us to have, a higher education, like whether it's law school or a master's in something or whatnot. But at the same time, I see that my dad can pick me up from school at 3 o'clock and he can take
Hmm.
me to soccer practice, where a lot of my friends' dads couldn't because they're still at work until 5 o'clock. So I picked up on those things and I was like, man, I really want to be able to do that for my future children. And how can you do that if you're stuck in a career, which all careers are important, right? Everything has
Yeah.
it's just a lot harder. Or we used to go to Syria every summer for 2 months, and my dad would be there with us for a month. And so, like, how does
Wow.
someone take a month off from work unless you're your own boss, And so
Yep.
from the beginning, I always aspired to be able to do that. And in my 6 or 7 years at the law firm that I worked at, while I gained a lot of really valuable experience and relationships, it just wasn't possible as long as I stayed there. And so I was very motivated to eventually get out and, start working for myself, for my family. And then, I'm sure as we'll discuss, long term, I want to
Yeah.
work for the community, for the Ummah.
Um, yeah, I agree 100%. Out of curiosity, when you were watching and uh witnessing your dad do these developments and these real estate deals and working in that business, was finance, lending, how he was structuring was that ever discussed? Was he ever teaching you about that? What was the conversation? Um, I'm assuming that back in the day, he was using loans, he was using financing. Why? Because in this country, there's just no other option, right? Guys like you and me, our generation, we're trying to change that. But back then, we had to work with what we had to work with. Was that ever talked about or anything like that?
It never was talked about, and to this day, we've never talked about it, but I'm certain that bank loans were involved, just considering the
Hmm.
scale of these projects. But alhamdulillah, now, like, since, restarted the business, here in Arizona, it's been strictly just cash, interest free. And sometimes I think, like, what are the dangers of riba? There's like no barakah in the wealth. We went through some tough times from 2006 to 2008, watching watching things get tough money
Yeah.
wise. And so that just kind of reminds me of, like, what is the wisdom behind why, interest and riba is forbidden. So alhamdulillah, now we're on a better track where we're not involved in that kind of stuff. But earlier, yeah, I mean, you're right. And I agree with you that this generation, I think, is taking it more seriously.
Well, I think I've talked to my own parents and my own aunts and uncles who came here in the States in the 80s, early 80s and into the 90s. And it was very much number one, I think, and we talked about this, one of the issues that our community has is we work solo. Like we work
Yes.
in isolation, right? So just when we talk about your dad and we talk about my dad, um, you know, investing and real estate and business, it is very true that you got to have something to make something, right?
Yeah.
You got to have money to make money. So how do we build our pot of equity, right? If I want to
Yeah.
do, or the biggest topic right now is like, Islamic mortgages, right? People want to buy their homes in a Sharia compliant way, but not everybody can afford 300, 400, $500,000 at a time, right? Like it would take them sometimes a lifetime just to save that amount, right? So what are we doing to address it? Obviously, back in the day when we're operating as individuals, leverage comes into the play because you're trying to take something small to amplify it into something bigger. But right when you talk about crowdfunding and all that, if we leverage each other, right, as partners, like, hey, we all come in, we all crowdfund this deal, this property, this asset. We're all equal partners in it. All of a sudden, we're growing together, right? Uh, it's community. It's helping one another out. And by the way, and when I talk about this, I'm not saying that everybody's doing this for free, right? Like you
Yeah.
invest, you appreciate, you get return, right? So to me, it just makes common sense to if I'm going to take my money, I would rather help my brother rather than help the board of directors of JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America or whatever it is, right? Um, so there's that element to it. And I'm really glad that we're at least trying to move that needle into our way. But at the same time, I think finally we have the resources and the knowledge and the expertise to do it. So we are definitely 100% taking the baton from our parents and we're going and doing it the right way. So how's the market in Arizona? Because
So,
people always talk about the what's the word I'm looking for? Southern belt, right?
uh-huh.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
Arizona, Texas, Florida. These are the key states to invest in.
Yeah.
I can talk all day about Texas. What are you seeing in Arizona?
And I think there are probably a lot of similarities between Phoenix and Texas. But similarly, Phoenix, Maricopa County, is one of the largest counties in the country. It's growing rapidly. We have a lot of people that are still moving here for jobs, moving here to retire. So it's still growing, and that hasn't stopped. That's good. The market's definitely slowed down. Prices are definitely down year over year. A lot of that has to do with interest rates, what's happening with the economy. But you do need to look into it a little deeper. People are still buying houses. And so, as long as people are still buying houses, you can still sell houses. You just got to be priced appropriately. And so, what we're finding more recently is if we price our house slightly below market, it'll sell. It'll get interest really fast. It'll get a lot of showings quickly. People will be interested in seeing and buying the house. If you price too aggressively, it's going to sit on the market. And that's because buyers have all kinds of options these days. There's a
Right.
lot more inventory on the market, which when you see the articles that say, inventory has increased 50% or whatever, that sounds scary, but 50% or a high percent of a small number is still a small number, right? If you look
Yeah.
back to 2016, 18, 19, our inventory levels are still lower than back then. So it's not like we have a flood, like a huge amount of houses on the market. And then also, a lot of sellers are not desperate to sell. They bought before 2020. They have a lot of equity. They have low interest rates. So they're not in a position of desperation to sell. So, I mean, to summarize, the fix and flips, they still work. We're still doing well. Sometimes, or a lot of times, they'll sit on the market a little bit longer, which is okay because we don't have any debt on them, right?
Right.
Just means we get our money back later. But as long as we buy right, that's the most important thing. As long as we buy right and price it right on the back end when we want to sell,
Yeah.
then the business model still works. As long as people are still buying houses, then it still works.
I feel like we have very similar paths and trajectories. Um, Going back, what, 4 or 5 years, that COVID, post-COVID era of 2020 to 2023, 2024, let's call it. You were very actively flipping in that 3, 4 year period. How were you doing it? Were you finding were you getting deals from wholesalers, or were you finding deals off MLS, off the MLS market, and just buying, chasing, making offers and paying premium prices, but it just turned out okay because you could resell it at a higher price? How was that? How was that 2, 3 years for you?
So I'll have to speak on my dad's behalf actually
Okay.
for that period because that's when I was heavily focused on my law practice. So before 2021-ish, say, so 2010 to 2020, 21, we were buying houses almost exclusively at the trustee sales. So these
Wow.
were
Okay.
properties that went into foreclosure and they were sold at auction. And back then there used to be a huge list. I mean, they were selling houses, like a bunch of houses every single day, Monday through Friday, at the courthouse steps. I used to go to the auction. I had a few houses that we were interested in that we had underwritten and we had our max bids prepared for. And I would bid and we would usually buy like, maybe one or two a week over there. And then when COVID happened, we paused for a little bit. Things got really crazy. Um, and then we decided to jump back in kind of later in 2020. But what we started to see is with the forbearance and everything that was happening, banks were not foreclosing anymore. Nothing was going to auction. So the list for what was selling at auctions was tiny to like non-existent. And it stayed that way for a few years. And so when we decided to get back in, get really busy again, say 2021, 2022, that's when we started buying from wholesalers a bunch. Um, and then, so I mean, we bought a ton from wholesalers. Everything that we have right now, actually, except for one house, are from wholesalers. The one that's not from a wholesaler is from we bought on market. I negotiated it on market, but a wholesaler had previously had it, couldn't sell it, and then it went on market. And because I was already familiar with the property, we
Yeah.
made it. It was a pre-foreclosure situation. So, we're kind of adapting as things change, right? So we went from buying everything at auction, and then there's nothing available at auction anymore, buying from wholesalers. Now we're starting to see that the auction list is starting to trend up again. We're starting to see foreclosures go up. So over the last couple of months, I just started going to the auctions again. We haven't bought anything yet. We're kind of just watching it because a lot of those deals do get canceled, right? They show up on the list, you
Right.
get there, and then either the owner files for bankruptcy or one reason or another they get
Yeah, that was my
finished.
question. Like I've looked at I personally have never done the auctions or foreclosures. But I've heard horror stories of like
Yeah.
you inherit somebody else has a lien on the property, or God forbid there's somebody squatting in there and you have to evict them. And like a lot of times, are you buying sight unseen and you don't know what you're getting? Like, is that not scary?
You are buying sight unseen. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can drive by. Sometimes you can poke your head in the window, and whatnot. But, we have a good relationship with the title company. And so we always, we'll send them the list of the properties we're interested in before the auction, which you don't really see the final list until the night before, right? And so we send it to them that night, and then by early morning, before 10 o'clock, they review them. They don't give us like a formal title report or a commitment or anything,
Yeah.
but they will let us know, which lien the bank is foreclosing on. Is it a first or a second? Basically, they're letting us know that it's safe to buy and
Yeah.
that you're not buying a second position mortgage. So we do that study before going to bid on the house, and then sometimes, depending on where it is, depending on the deal, the price point, sometimes we'll drive by and just kind of poke around, see what we can, discover, make sure the house isn't burnt down or anything like that. But a lot of times we did buy houses sight unseen, just seeing what they look like
Wow.
on Google Maps. We don't have any pictures or nothing, so it is a big risk, and that's something that my
I feel like
dad.
you got to tell me like a horror story.
Oh
What's
yeah, I
the
guess.
worst
Uh,
situation that you got
okay,
into? And
okay, the worst one. Actually, this was my first ever flip that was in my name.
okay.
It was my dad's money, but he was like, I want you to get the full experience. So you go buy the house, you underwrite it, you're gonna work with the contractors we'll make your LLC, work
Yeah.
with the contractors for the renovations, and then list it and sell it, do the whole thing from beginning to end. So we buy it. It's a townhome in Phoenix, small place. We check it out. It looks like, any foreclosed property. Like, there's some damage, but nothing crazy. Walk in, seems like some carpet's been removed. The sliding door to the front yard is smashed, and there's glass all over the floor. There's like a pool of like red paint or something on the floor. Uh, Drywall issues, minor stuff. And so
Right.
I work with the contractors. We do our repairs, which we've been working with the same contractors over hundreds and hundreds of flips. So they basically already know what they need to do. And so, we tell them like, this is what you need to do. Let's get started. They get started, they do the work, all good. I schedule the pictures. We get the pictures. I list it for sale on the MLS. Goes under contract pretty quick. Everything seems great. We're going to make our profit and on to the next,
This
right?
sounds like a dream.
It was actually,
What's
I know,
coming?
right? Like this is going perfect. It was in Ramadan that I get this phone call because I
Okay.
remember it was at night. It was just before or after Taraweeh, I forget, but I get a phone call from the buyer agent, and she's like, Omar, are you aware that there was a murder in this house last year? And I
Ooh.
was like, oh no, I had no idea. And she's like, yeah, Google the address. And so I look up the address. Turns out this house went into foreclosure because the people that owned and lived in it were murdered by a neighbor who was upset about their dogs barking. That
And
I know,
does
I
that
know this
neighbor
got
still
really
live there?
morbid, but you asked for my worst story. So that
Okay.
pool of paint was not paint. The
Oh
red paint,
my
that was
God.
blood. Yeah.
So technically, so the law, you have to disclose if somebody died in your property, but you weren't aware of it.
Not in Arizona.
So,
No, not in
oh,
Arizona.
not in Arizona. Okay.
Arizona, you do not have to disclose, and this is before I went to law school. So this is my
Okay.
first, like legal research project. In Arizona, you do not have to disclose a death in your property. Now, that being said, they canceled, and you can cancel for basically any reason if you're
Sure.
within the inspection period. So they canceled. We get it under contract with a new buyer. Everything's fine. Few days go by, they cancel for the same reason. The neighbor started telling everyone that was coming what happened. So in our like third or fourth contract, I started disclosing it to everyone. Hey, just so you're aware, if you Google this address, you'll see the story behind this house.
Yeah.
It was renovated really well. Everything's clean. There are no smells, nothing. It's a safe area. This is just a crazy incident. And eventually we had a lady, she was moving here from Alaska and she did not care, bought it cash, and we got done with it.
Alhamdulillah. Great.
Yeah.
You know?
And we've had, I mean, that's like my craziest story. Some other
Yeah.
ones are, like finding people doing drugs inside. We had one incident with our title company where they missed a lien on the property and it cost us
Mm,
$70,000. So we
wow.
stopped working with that title company. But you'll have like the typical stories where squatters, there was an occupant that doesn't want to leave that you have to evict them. But besides that, like nothing crazy. And I mean, we've bought at least 500 houses from those auctions.
Nice. Um, okay, yeah. So for all the people out there who want to aspire to be house flippers, seeing all those A&E, Netflix TV
Yeah.
shows, there is acquiring the deals is not so it's a process, it's a strategy. You really have to know what you're doing. Uh I liken everything to profession, right? Like you got to study, know what you're doing, know what you're getting yourself into, uh, because in real estate, definitely house flipping, you, your money's made when you acquire, right? You have to acquire at the right price, the right basis, cost basis, in order for you to be successful going forward. Um, Now we get to the fun part of the rehab. I know you've had problems with contractors, delays, cost overruns, just plain old mistakes, right? Um, how's that process? How do you go about, are you a hands-on, like, are you going to site maybe every other day or something like that? Or do you have a GC who, here's the keys, I'll be back in 30 days, I want to see it finished? How does that? And you're
So,
doing, and you and your dad, you're doing multiple properties at a time, right? So how
yes.
are you keeping up and managing the portfolio, I say?
Yeah. Yeah, so we delegate, right? And so, my dad and I are a team. Luckily for us, he's a licensed general contractor himself. He's very familiar with the entire building and construction process, and so he's primarily in charge of construction. He doesn't do any of like the labor himself, but
Right.
he's like the brains behind the construction, and that's something that I'm trying to get more involved in, as he gets older and maybe wants to slow down a bit. I'll get more involved in the construction, but over the years, it's just building relationships with good contractors.
Yeah.
You'll work with some contractors, you set your expectations and they don't come through and you just fire them. Just stop working with them until you get to a point where you have some really reliable, consistent contractors. You got to find the ones that are looking to work with investors because they would rather have the consistent
Volume.
the volume than go out and work with like retail homeowners where maybe they'll charge more money, but then they're going out and bidding projects and not
Yeah.
getting the job. They're working for free basically doing that. Or you're dealing with a homeowner who is very picky. Like, there are headaches on both sides, right? And so you got to find those contractors that want to work with investors that are honest, reliable, will be at the site on time and work with them. And so, I've watched my dad build those relationships. Being honest, I'm not the one that built those relationships.
Yeah.
He did, but I'm working on continuing those relationships and having them. And then every now and then, I'm one of the things I'm trying to do, we met on social media. I'm trying to build a social media presence so that I
Yeah.
can leverage that to find referrals and resources. And so we did that recently where our pool guy just fell off the map, and that happens, right? Where your contractor just disappears for some reason. And, I asked, does anyone have any good referrals for a pool guy? Here's what we need.
Yeah.
And I got like 5 or 6 different referrals because so many of my followers are the other local real estate agents, real estate investors, fix and flippers. So I'm building my own relationships as I like get more involved in this business.
Awesome. So, you mentioned January 2024,
Yes.
you leave the job.
Mhm.
What was the thinking? What made you rip the cord? And what was like, was it scared? Were you scared? Were you nervous? What was the thought process?
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, obviously that it wasn't like a sudden decision that I made in
You had a
January
plan. You had a,
2024. Yeah. It started in 2023, which
okay.
honestly, I mean, I probably even before like 2021, I was like, eventually I'm gonna leave. Like I knew I was gonna leave. I wasn't gonna start
Yeah.
my own law firm. Um, but it was scary in 2023. I kind of had this epiphany or like, I was like, if I want to get involved in real estate investing and I'm having a hard time doing it because I don't have all of the capital that's needed to be able to pull it off, then there must be other people who feel the same way as me, other Muslims who want to invest in real estate, whether actively or passively, and they're unable to because they don't want to get any loans and they don't have the cash to do it. And
Right.
so I started to do some polling in my inner circle and then a little bit outside too, where I was like, you know, if I were to bring you an investment that looks like this with this kind of return, would you be interested in investing 50 or $100,000? And I found that there was a significant amount of interest in that. And I even broke it down to, like what would be the minimum return that you would require for you to be interested in participating. And it was lower than I expected. Like it was low enough to where I felt pretty confident that we could find those deals. And so we
What was
just
that
needed
number?
5 or 6%, like
Okay.
a 5 or 6 passive uh kind of
On an
return.
annual basis.
Yes. So, I was thinking initially, I was like, I want to get involved in these larger deals. I have, this fix and flip background, but I'm like, why don't we fix and flip apartment buildings, for example,
Mhm.
where, you buy a distressed asset that's underperforming for some reason, you renovate it, right? You're fixing it up just like a fix and flip house, and you stabilize it. So you rent it for a period of years. During that period, your investors are receiving a return, a passive return, and then somewhere down the line, you sell it and they also get a return on their capital. And so I was trying to, calculate, is it reasonable that I can find deals that'll cash flow after expenses a minimum of 5 or 6% per year? And then, with equity appreciation at the end of 3 or 5 years, maybe we can tack on another 3% per year. So you get
Yeah.
an annualized return of like 6 to 10% or 11 or 12, whatever it is. Um, with the principal and the equity appreciation being returned at the sale. So I kind of broke it down like that, and there were a lot of people interested. I mean, we have a ton of doctors in the community, lawyers, successful business people who have money sitting in the bank. The other thing I was thinking of is like, how much wealth do we have sitting in the bank doing absolutely nothing?
Right.
It's not even, we're not even collecting the 5% that banks are paying these days. I think it's more like
Mhm.
4.5%, right? Because that's interest. So like, why are we not putting that money to work? And it kind of goes back to what you said earlier, like, there's all kinds of reasons why, people for some reason in our community, people work alone. I don't know if
Right.
it's a trust issue or what, but
Well,
we
so
haven't.
like, let me ask you this because I have the same feeling that you had. Why do you think when you said that you were going out to talk to investors to gauge their interest, to see what would be the minimum return that they were maybe be with that we would be happy with, why do you think guys like you and me, where do we get this idea that, oh, we need to give the mountaintop, right? Like, where did that come from? Like, here we are thinking we need to do outrageous numbers and we need to do these extraordinary huge deals. We make it complicated for ourselves. When in reality, I agree with you. The same people, the same LPs, the same investors that we sit across from, to be honest, they crave simplicity, right?
Yes.
Like simplicity, um, ease to access, and transparency in execution and exiting. Um, Obviously, I think, especially in the environment that we're in now economically, nobody wants to lose money, right? Nobody ever does. Um, if we're able to conservatively make them 6, 7, 8% on a basic deal, we could do more on other deals. Hey, we're growing, right? We're growing, we're making money, we're returning it back to you. And at least for us, and I know you as well, like my one of my goals was to speed up uh, the process, right? One of the things that we are looking not to do is do these long lockups of 5 years, 7 years. Like no, like we want to get deals in, get them out, uh, give people the sense of accomplishment, or hey, we did this. Hopefully get them comfortable with the process, with the platform that we're doing, and inspire them to invest more, right? I think that's the other element to it. But yeah, man, like same thing. It was over. There was a thing about overcoming the fear of asking,
Yeah.
right? Now it's like you go and you talk to anybody and you say what you say. How many people, how many head shakes do you encounter? Or is it just,
Ah,
yeah,
I mean, they're like I would ask, I would have this conversation with some people, and sometimes you'd get very discouraging responses where they just say, "Oh yeah, that return is not gonna work. Like I could just invest my money in the stock market and make 15% per year."
hmm,
And so I'm fighting against, what happened post-COVID where the entire stock market shot up like crazy.
right.
Obviously now it's very different, right? So this will probably make raising capital for real estate easier, what's currently happening in the market. But back then, like 6, 7, 8%, just seemed tiny to a lot of people. And then I would go through the whole education part of it where I'm saying, well, those are unleveraged returns. I
Mhm.
totally understand how debt and leverage works, and I know that I can make you more money if I put financing on these projects. But what I'm offering here is an opportunity to invest in a safe, stable, halal investment where maybe the return is might be smaller than, which I don't necessarily think this is the case for all full cash investments, but maybe the return is smaller than it could be if we used debt, but it gives you peace of mind and
Yeah,
you're not compromising on your faith by participating. And it was just a numbers game. Like you just need to focus on your niche. You don't need everyone to want to invest with you. You just need to find the people that align with what I just said, where
yeah,
that sounds great to them. And if you talk to enough people, you'll find those people. There are plenty of them. And there are plenty of them that have millions and millions of dollars. And I wouldn't have quit my job if I didn't feel confidence in that.
right.
So there, you just
Yeah,
gotta
no, so
find them and bring them to
now
you.
I'm on a mission, you're on a mission. You are I love your profile. I love the videos you're making. You're walking houses, you're in the trenches. Um, you and I both talked about it's not comfortable, right? Like I personally don't like being on camera. I do it simply for the fact of spreading the word, spreading the knowledge, and I'm willing to sacrifice myself
Yeah.
to for the greater good and get people in here and hopefully grow together. But what are you working on now, if any projects? and what are you looking to do next?
Yeah, and I just want to touch on the social media thing because that's the second part of, you know, what you hear from, the community and why they're not interested in working in, larger projects together and wanting to be solo is the trust factor of
Mhm.
participating with other people on business ventures or real estate ventures. And so the idea behind doing social media and showing what you're doing and that, you're doing it already, I'm doing it, is to um, bring in the trust factor, increase the trust factor so that they see
Yeah,
that I'm active, that I'm actually doing what I'm saying, so that when someone wants to invest with you or invest with me on something, they can see that you're actually in the field doing
right.
what you're saying you're doing. You're not just theorizing, you're actually doing what you're doing, and they can feel comfortable giving you their money.
Hmm.
But that's why the social media thing is important, I hope. What I'm working on these days are um, more fix and flips. I'm trying to systematize what we're doing so that we can do a bit more. Um, it's a lot more work to find deals today than it was back when we used to get them all at auction, because at auction they're just provided in a list. So today I'm building really good relationships with wholesalers that bring us deals, and so there are a few wholesalers that we consistently buy a lot of deals from. I'm helping strengthen those relationships through what I'm posting on my social media, where they, kind of keeps me top of mind for these
Yeah,
people. It's helpful in a few different ways, but when you regularly work with wholesalers, they see you as someone they can trust, they can count on to actually close the deal. Where, if I say something, I try to actually do what I, say I'm gonna do. Like if I say, yeah, we'll buy this property at this price, so long as, I just need to walk it before we actually wire the EMD, and I just need to verify that it's in the condition that it is. I see the pictures, and as long as
yeah,
it's, roughly the same, like I'm giving you my price, like it's good. I'm good for it. So I'm building those relationships. I'm trying to learn as much as I can about the construction process, and then I also handle all of the sales for the flips. So, right now we have 4 properties that are pending, and they're all closing next week, actually, inshallah. Hopefully nothing goes wrong. And then we have 2 other properties that are listed for sale, which are struggling a bit. So it's
hmm,
not everything is rosy. Those 4 that are
right.
going to sell, inshallah, are great, but the other 2, one of them has really good spread, so we're not worried about it. We can just drop the price and we'll still make money. But it's on the market. It's been on the market for like 75 days.
Okay.
The other one we're most likely going to lose money on. But that's part of the business. Do enough deals, be prepared to lose money sometimes. It's okay. So I'm just working on improving all of that. And then at the same time, I'm actively looking for a commercial deal,
Gotcha.
like a small strip mall or like a small multifamily building, probably less than $3 million, where I would be raising the capital. So I've been building relationships with potential investors, um, mostly accredited investors, just because of the SEC laws, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Um, and just looking, it's been a grind. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not easy I don't want to just buy anything just to say I bought it. It has to be a good one. So it's been a grind, but inshallah, something will pan out.
No, inshallah, yes. And as a fellow operator, you just described, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of steps to it. Um, Acquisitions, underwriting, rehab, execution, uh, resale, investment, prospecting, marketing, all this stuff that's going on. And at the end of the day, it's just we're here, we're doing it, we're rolling our sleeves up, trying to do it in the best and most ethical and sustainable way. Um, so yeah, no, alhamdulillah, man. Thank you for taking the time so much. If anybody wants to find you and reach you, how do they do that?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok. The My username is at Omar underscore AZRE, which is just Arizona real estate. So at Omar underscore AZRE. Trying to be more consistent with my posting, but I definitely have not given up on it. And then if you want to reach out to me, you can just DM me there. I'm happy to
Perfect.
respond and talk to anyone about anything, really.
Awesome. I vouch for Omar. He's a great guy. I think best intentions there. Obviously, a lot of experience himself, his family. If you're in the Arizona area, definitely reach out to him. Um, so yeah, thank you so much again. We are definitely going to talk again and keep it going. Inshallah, maybe we talked about it. We do some deals together, right? A
Well,
little
love to.
Texas Arizona partnership there. So Alhamdulillah, thank you again. We'll speak soon again. And for all of you out there, if anything that we're saying is ringing a bell, connecting with you, please, please, please comment down below, share your thoughts, give us your questions. Omar and I will see it, we'll get to it, we'll answer it, and we're just looking to engage with you guys and yeah, let us know. So thank you guys again. Hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll see you guys soon.